If you're currently an owner of a Fujifilm X100, one of the older models, you know how great a camera they are, but you also know they come with a few idiosyncrasies. Well, if you've ever thought about upgrading to the V model, let's take a look at how Fujifilm has dealt with some of those idiosyncrasies and how this camera is improved and whether you should be upgrading to the V model. Hi, Peter Charles here, Focus for Life Photography. And today let's look at upgrading one of our old X100s to the V version and whether that's a good idea or not. I know a lot of people like to upgrade their stuff just to stay current, and I've never been that way. I'll upgrade only when I see a photographic advantage in the new model. If I don't, I won't upgrade. And previously I had an X100T that I bought used, but you might as well say the new car smell was still on it. The thing was barely used. I think the person probably took a couple of shots and put it back in the box and never used it again. So I was quite happy to take advantage of that. I love the camera, but in truth, I had a love-hate relationship with it because it did have some problems and did have some deficiencies. It came in two flavors. First, there was the basic deficiency of the camera itself, and the other was some bugginess. And I'll talk about the bugginess briefly first because some people may have also experienced the same thing. Not long after getting it, I went out to do some street photography, and I saw this guy walking down the road. He's got his headphones on, he's listening to music, his hands are going. Great. Took about maybe half a dozen shots. And when I looked at the SD card when I got home, there was one recorded. All the others, it's only the first one was recorded. All the others didn't get anything. Later, I saw an elderly man talking to a young woman on a bench, and they were really animated. And okay, that one's really good. Knocked off half a dozen shots, 0 written to the card. Well, on checking, I found that if I reset the menu and reset the system, this would clear this problem. But it was an indication of bugginess that, was always a worry. The other bugginess was the aperture shutter, where the aperture, when shutting down, would hesitate and then would close down. And that delays the picture taking. So if you were working in autofocus mode and you were trying to work fast, you ended up with problems. So I'll put a photo up of a couple in Cape Cod. They were sitting on a pier and they were having sandwiches. And the woman turned to her man to give him a bite of her sandwich. And this is going to be a good shot. I got the camera ready, all set to go. And as she puts the sandwich in front of his face, he's off in La La Land. He doesn't see it coming, and he recoils backwards. He looks horrified, has no idea what's in front of his face. Hit the shutter button, got it. I was so excited. This is going to be a great shot. And when I got back to the cottage and shoved the SD card in the computer and had a look, I got this. The camera was so slow in responding, both for the aperture chatter and the slow AF, that he had time to recompose his face before the camera actually fired. Now, I know about release priority and all that kind of stuff. It never made any difference with that camera. Didn't matter which one I used, it was still slow. So, you'd say, well, use back button focus. Well, that was sometimes iffy. Manual focus, well, I'm sure my T had the same characteristics of every 100 version camera prior to the V. And that is this focusing ring was very sloppy, or very, very loose, I should say. No resistance. And, is turn when you try to focus with it. It wasn't practical for manual focus. I mean, I made a joke on a forum when I was writing a post about it that it could be knocked off kilter by a glancing zephyr. Taking your hand away after manually focusing, you're likely to move it in the act of taking your hand away. So trying to use manual focusing with that lens was awful. I had problems with autofocus. I had issues with back button focus not always being reliable. And the manual focus was useless. I finally ended up putting a rubber band around the lens to give the ring some resistance. I got, when you buy asparagus tips, they come with this very high quality rubber band. I put that on the lens, and you see in this picture, I put it on this the lens to give it some resistance. And then I could use manual focus. I could use zone focusing. So I'd set the camera up for zone focusing, and away I'd go. I'd be in great shape. So the camera was lovely. I enjoyed using it. It was my favorite camera, but as I say, it was a love-hate relationship. So when the V came out, it addressed a bunch of issues for me. The first thing is you've got this wonderful focusing ring with resistance. Now I don't need the blue rubber band. It's weather sealed. You've got a flip out screen. Now I've used flip out screens in other cameras and I love them. It's great for street photography. You can actually do sort of this waist level focusing. It's fantastic. You can't ask for better if you want flexibility in how you take pictures. The way they handle the ISO is great. Everything about it, little things like, I'm going from memory now, but I believe in the X100T, if you set your ISO to auto and you use the exposure compensation, it didn't do anything. In this one, it does. You've got a much bigger sensor. I'm not a pixel peeper, so 16 megapixels is fine for me, but for those who really want, a lot of pixels, you got a lot of pixels in this one. And just they improved the lens as well. Again, it wasn't important to me because where the old lens was weak, I didn't use it in that fashion. But this one, if you do any sort of close-up photography with it wide open, having that improved lens is great. So they've improved some things, but they've added capability. And for me, the tilt screen, being able to do waist level viewfinder, that's great. And then with the manual focusing ring actually working as a manual focus, that's even better. Now I want to show you something else here. You see at the bottom of the screen, that's my depth of field in the blue bar. And I'm just going to move the focusing ring just slightly. And you can see I don't have to move it very much to get considerable change in the focus. That's all it takes. And you've changed the focus of the image. And also the other thing I'll mention about my depth of field indicator here, I've set it to the film depth of field, not the pixel. The difference there is that when you set to film, you're not getting the critically sharp range of the depth of field. So what's acceptably sharp in film circumstances and what's pixel sharp are two different things. So you have the option in this camera to use your depth of field for pixel sharpness, maximum sharpness, which is a lot smaller depth of field, or a film acceptable depth of field, which is what I use. So again, fantastic option for this camera to be able to have that. Something else which is cool, and I don't think this was on the T version. Again, I don't have the T anymore. I'm going by memory. But when you use manual focus and you're using the optical viewfinder, as soon as you start to move the focusing ring, it snaps into electronic viewfinder mode. Boom, you're straight into electronic viewfinder. Now you're focusing using the EVF, and if you set peaking on, you can use peaking to get your critical focus. And also peaking gives you a hint about your depth of field as well. And then as soon as you stop focusing, you're back to OVF again. It's wonderful. I mean, it's such a neat feature to have. So when you put all this together, you've got a tremendously more capable camera in basically the same package. Same aperture ring, same shutter speed dial, same compensation dial. It's the control layout is simplified. Something else, you can see that they've got a joystick instead of a four-way controller. I prefer joysticks. I'm okay with the four-way controller. I've used them for years. But having a joystick for me, it's a huge improvement because the ability to bring the camera to your eye, and if you're an EVF, and move your focus point around, things like that. I mean, it makes it a very practical, general purpose camera, not just a street photography camera. I end up using this thing in all sorts of different ways that I didn't anticipate. I often grab it when I know a wide angle lens is going to do the job. I'll grab this rather than grab my XT3 with the zoom lens on it. It's just easy to use and focuses quite closely. generally speaking, it just handles very lovely. So if you are actually looking for a camera upgrade to go from an old 100 to the V, what you're getting is the weather sealing, the better sensor, the better lens, the much snappier autofocus. I'm talking about that. That's a big thing. You don't get that delay anymore. When you press the button, it fires, and you don't get the aperture chatter anymore. So when you're shooting, you can shoot quickly. Now, bang, 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 and it will work, which is fabulous. You can't ask for better. So these are the things that make this camera a much more usable street camera and a much more usable general purpose camera versus the older versions. So providing you can find one, because they're in huge demand, if you can find one, I'd suggest picking it up. And now you know why they're in huge demand, because they are in such a jump up from the older versions. And it is one of the few times I've actually gone out and bought an upgraded version of a previous model that I'd owned. So I enjoy this V tremendously. It's made a huge improvement, and that love-hate relationship I had with the T is now just love. So if you can get one, get it. Don't hesitate. Cheers.